And there's
Okay.
a Native American belief that trauma is passed down 7 generations before it resolves. So I think what makes humans more than animals, what the greatest thing that humans have is our ability to predict. Like they're a way of going in the shore, but they're eventually gonna simmer out and fizzle away. And everything in a person's life, for the most part, not everything, but most everything, you're going to recover from. Nobody stays forever.
Hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host, Keegan, and this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And I've got a question for you. Have you ever kind of just wanted to avoid the shadowy places? Do you go to the shadowy places looking for enjoyment or something along those lines? Well, there are places most people avoid. The places where pain has left fingerprints on the walls and silence hums like an echo of everything lost. But for Dr. Chad Scott, those places became invitations. A therapist, author, and educator, and a liver transplant survivor, Chad has walked through Auschwitz, Ground Zero, and the shadowed corners of history, not to glorify tragedy, but to uncover what it can teach us about healing. After nearly losing everything, his health, his marriage, and his sense of self, he discovered that standing in the presence of humanity's darkest moments can sometimes shine the brightest light on what it means to be alive. So, Dr. Chad Scott, how are you doing today, my friend?
I am doing great, Keegan. So happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week, and just excited to talk with you guys.
Sweet. Well, Dr. Chad Scott, what exactly is your book about, and was it about your liver transplant?
My liver transplant plays a little role in my book, but it's really about my my life story of it's a memoir. And I talk about how my life was pretty good for the most part up until about 10 years ago when I started getting sick with autoimmune issues. And I had a type called vasculitis, and Harold Ramis from the Ghostbusters died of vasculitis. So it can be a deadly disease, and they weren't sure if mine was a deadly type. And the treatment for that type is basically chemotherapy for the rest of your life.
Oof.
And so I started I've always probably had more anxiety than I really cared to admit.
Yeah.
And I think I kept a good lid on it. But during that time, it just, became undeniable. It was a problem. Between my illness and my anxiety, my marriage, which was like, I married the love of my life. I mean, she was great, and we had 10, 11 great years, and that just was too much for her. So she left, and I kind of dove into alcohol. I come from Northeast Minnesota, a place called the Iron Range, and we are heavy drinkers up here. and I played right along, even though I've been a therapist my whole adult life. I've been in the mental health field since 2000 and taught psychology since 2006 or 2003. But therapists have issues too, just like anybody else. And I really started hitting I don't want to say the bottle, the can. Miller Lite was my drug of choice. And hit that pretty hard. And I didn't know at the time I had an underlying liver disease. And that just put it over the edge. So I ended up I went into the ER a couple of times with stomach pains, and they said, oh, it's just, it's gastritis, or it's, just take these over-the-counter pills. And I finally went in and kind of demanded, like, I need some answers. This is not just a normal stomach ache. And they did an ultrasound, and I got a call one day saying, you have severe cirrhosis, and my life changed. In a hurry. Yeah. So my book, getting back to that, my book is that story, but also how I've gone to these historically dark places around the world. And especially when I was going through the darkest hours of my own life, how going to those places actually, I went there, out of what I thought was my interest in history. I like to go honor people's suffering. As a therapist, I really am intrigued by human stories of suffering. And how people got through those, and how, and why people maybe didn't, and reflecting on that stuff. But what you find is you see little pieces of yourself when you go through there. And when you have your darkest times in your life, and I had a really dark time. At one point I was diagnosed with liver cancer, even though it ended up being a false positive. For 9 months, I thought I had liver cancer.
Hey, no.
Which is a 5% survival rate. What I found is, I had this anxiety,
Mhm.
and because of my experience in those places, I think I really learned how to become a true stoic and
Hmm.
not let my fear of death and my fear of illness. So I went through that whole time. So just remember, like
Mm.
5 years prior to that, I was
Uh-huh.
absolutely miserable with anxiety. Couldn't have had a worse
Mm.
anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And when I was going through the liver disease, I actually had almost no anxiety going through that. And I really attribute a lot of that to my reflections that I had in these really dark places.
Mhm.
And I think by honoring people's suffering, it almost comes back to gift you through those reflections, and you kind of carry the torch for people, and it
Mhm.
really allows you to, when you kind of take in their suffering when going through those places, it comes
Mhm.
back to you, to help you through your darkest hours.
Very interesting. And thank you for opening up about all that, because I know that sometimes those really dark spots of our own past may not be the easiest to touch on or even talk about sometimes. So I really appreciate you just being open about that, because I mean, I've got my own liver scares, but ignorance is bliss. What can I say?
You're right, right.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
when your doctor says, "Hey, you have fatty liver," which I just said, "Oh, everybody has fatty liver," but yeah, that fatty liver turned into cirrhosis pretty dang quick.
oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real quick, what was one of the things that made you kind of, so it was just your stomach that was being upset, and you're like, oh, I need to go to the ER, huh?
Yeah,
Mm.
looking back prior
Mm.
to that,
Yeah.
I had, I struggled with being tired, and I
Mm.
just thought it was aging. I didn't really, so I would take a lot of naps during the day. And
Mm.
what I found out is once I actually had a transplant, I had a
Mm.
transplant in March, and yeah, so it wasn't very long ago, a year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
Mm.
But as soon as I got out of bed and could see the whites of my eyes, which I didn't realize how yellow they were actually.
Mm.
I have a picture of a day before and a day after my transplant. My eyes, and it's like I had no idea how bad my eyes were yellow. And as soon
Wow.
as I could see my eyes, it's like, oh my god! But I could tell my life was changed because I just felt so different. I mean, just
Mm.
having that new liver even for a day,
Huh.
I knew that oh my gosh, all these things that I had suffered before, they're gone. I'm not tired. I have endless energy. I just got back from 2 weeks on a tenting safari in Africa.
Huh.
Like literally got back Sunday. Um, yeah, So
Wow.
I mean, I'm living life, and before I wasn't.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you were able to see such a profound change in literally a day. And I mean, that would be a scary part too, is because I know my eyes are not as wide as I'd like for them to be, like on the very, very outer parts and everything.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, yeah, but I don't really have anyone to blame but myself. And that's the biggest regret that I'd say I'd ever have, is just throwing my health away, kind of like that. But you're able to now sit there, and you've been through the fire and flames per se, but rather you've been through the shadows, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When we were talking earlier, I was talking about going through the
Mm.
Paris catacombs, and I think that's a good example
Uh-huh.
because you would think the catacombs, where there's 6 million skeletons in the catacombs, you're walking
Mm.
through just these piles of bones and skulls, and you walk through there and you see a skull and you think, this person had a name, they had a face, they had people that loved them, they loved people. What did they do as a job?
Mm.
And you have these reflections about, like, gosh, this is going to be me in not that many years, and you walk out the other side of that, and walking through darkness, and the darker the place, the more it really at least hits me.
Mm.
For example, I start my book off with walking through the gas chamber at Auschwitz. There's one gas
Oof.
chamber that's called Crematorium 1,
Mm.
and it's the only one that's still standing today, I
Mm.
believe. And you walk down in there, and it's just a big cement basement. Um,
Mm.
and and nail scratches on the walls, and I mean, it's.
Mm.
And then my tour group kind of went through there because you have to go through a tour group, and the tour group
Mm.
went to the next room
Mm.
fairly quick, and I couldn't. I just stopped in my tracks,
Mm.
and I could just picture people falling one by one, men, women, children. I mean, the thousands of people that died in that very room.
Mm.
And right standing in the gas chamber,
Mm.
it was like I knew life was changed in that moment. I
Yeah.
knew I could not walk out the other side of that building and not be a changed person.
Mm.
And it wasn't, I mean, it was terrifying, yes.
Yeah.
And then you walk into the next room and you
Mhm.
see the furnaces,
Mm.
and you see rail tracks going to the furnaces, and you're thinking like, I mean, this is the industrial scope of Auschwitz is just unbelievable. And then you
Mhm.
walk out, which is a major relief when you walk out, but you feel like you carry those people's stories forward. Like from then on, I was much more aware of for example, just wars around the world, and I've become more of an advocate, I think, for peace. And but also when you go through the darkness, whether it's the catacombs or Auschwitz, walking through the darkness is one of the quickest ways to changing your perspective in your own life. And it's one of the, walking through the darkness illuminates life. And they call that a memento mori. And a memento mori, actually it came from the Romans, where they'd throw major parades for Roman generals. And they'd get really cocky. So they would hire a person to walk behind them. And when they got too cocky, this person would whisper in their ear, memento mori. And memento mori means, the Latin transition is, remember you must die. And that caught on in the Victorian era and the Elizabethan era, and with Christianity, and it became more of a remember you must die. And the flip of that coin is remember to live with great intention, love people, smell the roses. Everything is a little more beautiful when you walk through the darkness and you get to the other side. And there's other ways maybe to do that. I don't know how you feel about psychedelics, but that is a big up and coming treatment in for PTSD. I was just at actually the book is right here, The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk, I went to his conference a few months ago, and that was kind of the biggest thing that they talked about, is how psychedelics under certain conditions of a therapist and things like that can be really healing. Other ways is having a major illness, and a lot of people that have had cancer or major heart attacks or things, they talk about how that has changed their perspective on their life, and they're gonna not take life for granted anymore. And you love deeper, and you're just a better person overall, I think, when you go through those things. Another one is they call it the overview effect, when astronauts go up and they see Earth and how small they are, and how small Earth is compared to the whole universe, and how they're just like a little speck of dust on in a like a speck of sand on a beach or whatever. And and that really changes how you see life. And dark tourism, without a doubt, does that. So there's actually a really good book. It's more of an academic book. You kind of have to like academic type stuff, but it's how dark tourism and religious pilgrimages are very similar. And you go into those places, especially the really dark ones, and you ask the bigger questions of life, like, what am I here for? What happens after you die? Things like that. And it really, again, changes your perspective on life.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about changing perspectives, because really, whenever we're faced with life or death situations, the situation itself, we really don't get much of a 10-second, do you want to do this or not kind of thing, right? It's very much a split-second decision. But then whenever we have those things that really just seem to trudge on, such as a chronic illness or something, it gives us that time to really reflect. And that's the moment that our perspective is able to shift, I think. But a lot of people don't really shift it. Why do you think that is?
Why people don't really shift their perspective? I think a lot of it depends on your intention when you go into, I can speak for dark tourism more. I think when people go in with a lot of empathy, a lot of reverence for those places, it will change your life. But if you go in and just treat Auschwitz like a museum, and you don't really absorb Auschwitz, or if you go to even a cemetery and you just oh, that's a nice headstone, that's a blah, blah, but what if you go in there and it's oh, look at those dates. I mean, I wonder what their life was like. They only lived for, they died when they were 20 years old, and and they don't have anybody with the same last name by them, or you just start asking questions, and the more you reflect on things, the more it comes back to help you. But if you go through and just check off, if you go through like a tourist, maybe that's a good example. If you just go to these places like a tourist, you're not going to get much out of it other than, hey, I was there, check it off the list. But if you go in and really absorb it,
Mm-hmm.
it changes your life. And I think the same goes for people that have had diseases and things. If you go through with kind of more of an open mindset rather than just being so wrapped up into death and well, a great example is how I treated my autoimmune illness
Okay.
with anxiety rather than with more of a stoic mindset, which is basically the same thing as the Serenity prayer. Is a stoic mindset was, change what you can, and if you can't change it, accept it, and let go of that fear of death. Your fear of death isn't keeping you alive; it actually makes you more likely to die. And so but it took a shift in my perspective for me to get there, and I think dark tourism allowed me to shift that perspective.
Okay. And real quick, which place would you say is your so far top favorite place that has shifted your perspective the biggest? Would it be Auschwitz?
So it's hard to say because you get pieces. It's hard to compare because it's like, how do you compare, Auschwitz with Hiroshima per se, or because when I went to Hiroshima, okay, I go through as an American. I'm there with almost exclusively Japanese people there, a lot of school children there. Like that was my country that nuked a civilian population, and you see how terrifying that is. And you go through, and I went through it, and I just felt really, as an American, you feel guilty going through there. I don't care if you thought it was justified or not. You still feel horrible hearing those stories, and it wasn't justified, but that's my opinion.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you compare but it changed. So, and then the Whitney plantation, even so the Whitney plantation down by New Orleans, it's about 45 minutes out of New Orleans, and it's as far as I know, it's the only plantation that really exclusively tells the story of a plantation through the slavery point of view. And you learn about the children, and there's several memorials in there. It really talks about how horrifying it was. And it really, it's still a beautiful plantation, but at the same time, it really downplays. So like the main house is just a walk-through area. You don't spend any time in the main house. You literally just walk through it. And I'm sure that's done on purpose because they don't want to glorify the antebellum South. They want to show like how horrific it was. So, and it talked a lot about the children. And, and you think about narratives of slavery, you don't think about the children all that much, but there you do. And there's a lot of statues of children, and there's a whole children's memorial, and you get out of there and you're just more dedicated to helping kids. It's like, I don't care what race you are. It's like, I just wanted to help kids more after that. And, and also fight for injustices and, and that type of thing. Now, I can answer your question though, probably what was the most life-changing, and it probably was Auschwitz though. Walking through that basement in Auschwitz was probably I talk about it as that's probably the closest place to hell I've ever been. I've been in a different, personal hell in other places, when divorce and, things like that. Yeah. But in terms of a physical place, that was probably the closest place to hell I've ever been. And you can't help but being changed.
Yeah, and that's really scary to really say too. And here's one thing that I'm kind of curious to hear your opinion on, because it's one of those things where we're able to sit there and say, this is a historical site and this is what happened, right? But what happens whenever the victor decides to erase that part of history? What happens if we lose a section of such a great tragedy that we're suddenly able to forget it per se? But there's the thing is that we don't really forget it because that's intergenerational trauma that happened, and so it's in the human bloodline regardless of any tragedy that it is, right?
Yeah, you are hitting on so many things that I talk about in my book, so the Native American, I work 2 days a week at a clinic on a reservation. And there's a Native American belief that trauma is passed down 7 generations before it resolves. Through the study of epigenetics, which is how your genes are changed after a trauma and how that actually influences generations. And it does. So your trauma can affect your great-great-great-grandchildren. And it takes about 7 generations. So the Native Americans are right. It takes about 7 generations before trauma resolves through, the DNA is expressed through epigenetics. So yeah, it's kind of getting back to what you're saying too, is going to Berlin. So Germany, and I was actually, when I was in Africa, I was the only American. I went by myself, but I met up with a tour group, and we spent 2 weeks camping in the Serengeti and throughout places in Kenya and Tanzania. But I was with a couple of Chinese people and a few Belgians, and there were 4 Germans. And we talked about, because they're very aware of American politics. And one thing that I talk about is in my book too, is Germany is really good at not forgetting their past. They don't glorify the Nazis, but they tell the story. You go to Berlin, they have all kinds of memorials and monuments and museums and places where you can reflect on the horrors of fascism and the Nazis. And, there's a place called the Topography of Terror, which it talks about the 1920s and 30s Berlin, and then how, getting into World War II and how Hitler came to power. And it talked about how they banned books, how he started a police force in the major cities, and then started, and under crime, so he wanted to fight crime in the major cities, especially Berlin. And all of a sudden he started arresting his political rivals. So the people in Germany, and I'm not, I'm trying not to be political, but the people from Germany in my tour group actually were, when I had mentioned that, how I felt about, American politics. And they said, "Oh my gosh, we're so relieved that you say that, because we wanted to ask you so bad that, so but what they're saying is, what's happening in 1930s Berlin is happening in the United States right now, and everybody in the whole world sees it plain as day except the Americans." And I don't want that. I mean, I don't want to be political. I'm trying not to be political, but that is reality of what was being said. And going to places like the Whitney Plantation, and we can't forget our history of Native American genocide and slavery, and we can't minimize that stuff. Otherwise,
it repeats.
We need to listen to historians and social scientists, and not politicians and political pundits.
Oh, I 100% wholeheartedly agree. And what's that other saying? If history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And that's the thing, is that I don't know many stanzas that can rhyme with fascism and still not be fascism.
Right.
And that's the scary thing, right? Because whenever we're sitting here in the 1920s, 1930s Berlin of sorts, we're also kind of sitting here going like, well, what can we maybe do in this regard, right? Because I know for myself growing up, I was always like, what would I have done during those times? And it's right here, right now. And it's like, oh, well, I'm doing a podcast, but this is something that is hopefully something that will help people along the lines, because this is a way to heal, right? Because if we also sit there, and I'm glad that you brought up the Native American genocide and stuff, because if we forget that, we're bound to do it again and again and again, in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. It might not be the same exact way, I mean, I don't think we're going to ever see slavery the way we saw it in the past, but we could definitely see, races being very much, kind of, we pay them minimum wage, and all the, the privileged, the half of the white folks, are making millions of dollars on the backs of everybody else. Yeah, technically not slavery, but it is,
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that they're going to try to find it because we're more educated, or we should be, and they're going to try to find another way to drape the veil over our faces, per se. And that's why it's so important, I think, to change our perspectives on things, because if we always look at the same thing with the same perspective all the time, I know for myself, I would be dead. I would be dead a long time ago, and there's nothing I could have done after that. But I had something that shook my life to its core, and my perspective changed ever since then. And you had something very similar, but now we're trying to help people realize that there's something good that comes out of the dark, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people who have gone through addiction talk about their rock bottom moments. And do we want our country to hit a rock bottom moment before we change? No. Do we need another civil war? Because that's got to be rock bottom when you have a civil war. And do we need another civil war before we realize that our country's up, And so, I think another perspective to see is, What the bar for fascism is,
Mhm.
and it's when people are more afraid to say something
Mhm.
than they are, because they're worried about the repercussions if they do say something.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
the
yeah.
thing is we all need to be talking and saying something. Otherwise, we are a fascist society.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really, really glad that you brought that up too, because it's one of those things that normally we don't try to get political on the show because it's one of those things like, hey, we're trying to deal with mental health. But whenever we're dealing with it in such a blatant, obvious kind of thing, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry, if we ignore it, then we're actually just helping it along its way, right?
Okay, so I'm a therapist.
Huh.
And I work with people every day, and I will
Uh-huh.
tell you the main thing right now affecting the majority of people is
Mm.
the politics. I don't care what side of the aisle you are
Uh-huh.
on, it is affecting your mental health right now more than anything else. I mean, yes,
Mhm.
people come in and they've had, sexual trauma or
Mhm.
an anxiety disorder or depression. Yeah, there's certain things, somebody died, whatever. I mean, that's
Mhm.
affecting their mental health. But if you look at what is the main thing across the board, it is politics
Politics.
right now. Yeah.
So, is there something that you can take from your dark tourism and apply it to those politics in a sense? Or is that really just the quickest draw that we can do right now is between what's going on in America in 1920s and 30s Berlin, Germany?
So I think what makes humans more than animals,
Mm,
what the greatest thing that humans have is our ability to predict.
mm,
And it's when we predict accurately
mm,
that we kind of get this homeostasis and the human ecosystem, becomes stable again.
uh-huh,
And we need to start looking at science, looking at data, looking at things that are just, realistic and not be fooled by Facebook algorithms and,
mhm,
and other social media and politicians and pundits. And because
mhm,
they have an agenda. We need to look at data. And when you do that and you can predict things right,
uh-huh,
um, that will create a stable world. But
mm,
and the thing is too is if you look at the history of the world,
mhm,
good always wins, but it
yeah.
might wipe out a whole generation of people.
Mhm,
World War II killed how many, millions of people. World War One. I mean, and you can go
mhm.
back all,
To a long time ago.
but it always good wins
Mhm.
eventually.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that's really good to highlight too, because whenever we're dealing with this political climate, whenever we're dealing with our own morality, especially in the moment, it's one of those things that it's good to know that even if I'm not here, the good will eventually reign supreme, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think I'm just echoing what you're saying is, if we are not here, and that's the thing is we can't fear our own deaths. I mean, we don't do anything stupid that's going to get you killed, but we can't fear our own deaths because if we do, we're not going to get out of our comfort zone to help people. And
Yeah.
we need to get out of our comfort zone, speak up, and let people know that we think things are up and
Hmm. Yeah.
things need to change. And when we do that, other
Hmm.
people hear you and they
Hmm.
feel comforted by your words also.
Hmm.
And if I'm not here tomorrow, the world will, at some point again stabilize and be good again. But let's not let it get bad. Yeah.
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 Let's not let it get bad. And hopefully, if it does get a little bit more turbulent, it settles down pretty quick. But it's one of those things that whenever we are struck with tragedy or the things like that, humans have a really good tendency to kind of pull together, right? And that's another thing that the darkness or the hard times really do a good thing about is bringing people together, showing people their strengths, right? Even though it may seem impossible per
Yeah.
se.
I mean, even going through Auschwitz, I mean, most everybody who went there, they died as soon as they got there. They got off a
Hmm.
train, and then the doctor said, if you don't look healthy, you go right to the gas chamber. If you look
Hmm.
healthy, maybe you'll live for a few months.
Hmm.
Um, but some people made it through Auschwitz, and so not all these dark places. I mean, they're dark, but some
Hmm.
people made it through. My favorite book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he was a psychiatrist who ended up being a doctor while he was in
Hmm.
Auschwitz, but he was a Jew and he was kept alive because he was a doctor. But he
Hmm.
um, um, created this theory called logotherapy, which is basically meaning. Logos.
Yeah.
Latin for the word meaning.
Huh.
And what he found is that people that saw their suffering as a kind of a test of themselves, and they had meaning to go on. It might be something, just to see if your family's even alive or dead. I mean, but if they had something to live for, they lived. And the people that just kind of didn't have anything to live for, where they just kind of gave up hope, they died. And even with suicidal clients, we, people that have, if you can, as a therapist, but also as, if you're talking to anybody who's suicidal, if you can give them hope in any way, shape, or form, that is why people choose life. I mean, even the smallest little bit of hope can cause people to hang on.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you said that too, because hope can be something that it seems like it's gone sometimes, right? But I've heard someone before, I don't remember where this was, but there's the term from Fall Out Boy song, I'm hopelessly hopeful,
Okay.
and I heard that before and I was like, ooh, I like that. I'm hopelessly hopeful. Like, you're never going to not find me hopeless. Like, I may be down, I may be in the mud, I may be broken completely and not able to move, but there's a part of me that's going to be like, well, at least there's something that will happen from this. I don't know what, but
Exactly.
and it sucks though, because sometimes it does kind of literally drag you through the mud and you have to just kind of ride out the ride.
Yeah. There's some in mental health we call, surf, or, you just, you ride those emotions out. You ride them like you ride your emotions like they're a wave going in the shore, but they're eventually gonna simmer out and fizzle away. And everything in a person's life, for the most part, not everything, but most everything, you're going to recover from. Nobody stays forever. I mean, it usually gets better. There are certain cases where somebody has a terminal illness and you're 100% going to die, and then trying to muster dignity and not fearing death and being strong, and and that is the meaning in their life maybe at that point, and just dying with dignity. So even in the worst of circumstances, you can still have hope and meaning, and that's what keeps people going.
Yeah. And so what was one of the things that kind of kept you going whenever you were kind of in the thick of it all?
Good question. I think when I was going to a lot of these dark tourism spots, my life really, like I talk, they're little mirrors that emerge when you go to Auschwitz, and you go to Hiroshima, when you go to Whitney Plantation. I mean, I talk about maybe 75 places around the world, and all of those places have given me reflections. And what became crystal clear to me is the reason that I am on this earth is my family and friends and my helping people. Those are really the two things: is my family, friends, and helping people is what keeps me going. Yeah, I have hobbies and things I enjoy. I love to travel, love all kinds of things, but I love aviation. I'm a private pilot, but that isn't my meaning of life. My meaning of life is helping people and loving my friends and family.
So you're kind of able to catch that glimpse of your purpose while you were doing the dark tourism, right? So do you think that you would have actually came across that same discovery without it?
Well, if you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I probably would have gave you the same answer.
Okay.
But the difference is when you go to these places, you feel it. So you feel these places. And so I could have told you what my meaning of life was, but I didn't necessarily feel it as deep as I do now, as I did after I walked through Auschwitz. Life has changed when you go through these places. People maybe are familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence, and then you have your regular intelligence, basically how smart you are.
Yeah.
And people that are successful in life, what tends to be more important is your emotional intelligence. And when you go through these places, it ingrains in a part of your brain, it sears in your brain, in the emotional parts of your brain, that those lessons are always there. And they help me at, for example, I went through the Churchill war rooms, and I went to Parliament and reflected on Churchill giving his "We will fight on the beaches" speech. And knowing how much that motivated England and the UK during, their darkest hours. And they were kind of on their heels versus the Nazis. They were getting close to, I don't want to say they're defeated, but it was getting closer to being defeated. And when I was going through my liver transplant and I was starting to recover, I was in so much pain. I mean, I was slit from side to side, and even though I was feeling better, I could tell my life was different. I still was in a lot of pain from my actual surgery. And I just remember Churchill's words came to me just like, when you're going through hell, keep going. And when you're walking through hell, keep walking. And that I could hear Churchill in my brain all the time. And I would just pop out of bed and, I would conjure up like how it felt back in England in the 1940s. And, like even before that, I was called down to the University of Minnesota because that's where I had my transplant. So I was called down there. They had a liver for me. And there was a delay. So I remember there was a delay in Normandy. They were, because of the weather, they didn't hit the beaches. They delayed it one day. And so I was delayed. And I started thinking, I felt comforted by okay, they had a lot of anxiety. They knew what they were getting into now because the cat was out of the bag, and they had this delay, and I'm having a delay. And then actually my liver fell through, so I didn't get it. So I got a call in the middle of the night from the doctor, and that was actually the closest I ever I didn't have a whole lot of cravings after I quit drinking. But oh my God, if I had a beer at that exact moment when the doctor told me you're not getting a liver, because I was like, why am I doing this? At that time, I could hardly breathe because the fluid around my lungs was just, it was making me, I could hardly breathe. I was yellow. I felt so bad. All I wanted was a liver transplant, and I didn't get it. And then I thought their job was after that, initial shock, and, I had a craving for 2 minutes, but after that initial shock, I started thinking about the people at Normandy again. It's like their job was to get to the beaches and fight on. My job was to get to the transplant and fight on. And I got a call a week later, and I was transplanted.
Yeah.
Everything worked out.
Okay. And I love that for you. And I love that because it really does kind of highlight the history repeats itself, but not necessarily in the exact same.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And
it rhymes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It echoes. It echoes. I mean, history echoes. And that was a way that it echoed. I felt like by paying my respects at Normandy, by paying my respects at Auschwitz, by, all the cemeteries I've been to, and reflecting on people's hardships in their lives, it came back to help me when I was going through those darkest hours.
Yeah. Do you kind of subscribe to anything a little woo-woo?
What do you mean by woo?
Well, I mean, whenever we have something such as a Holocaust or a genocide, whatever we want to call them, but it's supposed to scar the land and scar the energy in that area. And you had said that while you're going through those spots, it kind of sears it in your mind, sears it on your brain. And it's something that you also said you can feel it, like it's a tangible feeling. So it does kind of make me wonder, how much of that is actually holds credence, because the Native Americans were correct in us being able to resolve intergenerational trauma through 7 generations, which is actually really cool. So how do we know that what you're saying isn't actually just someone or that energy kind of came along with you and is they're pushing you forward through those hard times, because it's hey, I didn't make it, but I know you can.
Okay, so I'm a social scientist, so I look at what is the actual evidence. So in my personal life, I had an experience where I was at the Vatican and I saw the Pope, and there's this belief in Catholicism that if you're blessed by the Pope, you're covered for 90 days once you go back home. I mean, it's and I'm thinking at the time, yeah, right. Okay, so and I write about this in my book is because I write about the ghost chapter. And I've been to haunted places around the world. A few months ago, I stayed in Lizzie Borden's bedroom. I stayed there by myself in Lizzie Borden's bedroom. I was actually in the house by myself for a couple hours. It's vibes. You get vibes. Without a doubt, you get vibes. Is that vibes because of my own mind, or is that vibes? But after I was at the Vatican, though, I was driving to work. It was super foggy. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you barely. And so I'm driving to work, and I hear this voice in my head. I don't hear voices. I heard this voice in my head. It said, "Chad, slow down. There's a car coming at you." And I was freaked out. I was like, "Oh my God, was that God? Was that was that something? Was that my own imagination?" but it was a thought inserted in my brain that almost was vocalized. I couldn't tell you if it was an actual voice or if it was a thought inserted. And there's a concept in mental illness called thought insertion where people think they have thoughts. Anyway, so I did slow down. I slowed down big time, and I was white knuckling it at that time because it spooked me. And within probably 20 seconds, there's a car flying at me in my lane. And had I not reacted so fast, had I not slowed down, 100% sure I would be dead. And there's a car full of kids. They're probably on their way to school. And there's a car full of kids and they pulled over. I pulled over. There's a car. I can't remember if the car is behind me or behind them, but another car pulled over, and we just sat there. And usually I'd be like, "You idiot," but I was so calm at that point. I was like, "Oh my God, that was God," And, I mean, there was something there. So now when I go through these places, it's like that is in the back of my head. I mean, that just was too much of a coincidence. The one time I ever heard voices in my head saved my life, And so, yeah, I do think there is something, but I talk about it as like, I just don't have enough evidence but you also have to have faith in things too, I guess. And I also think that when you go to religious places, you're on hallowed ground. You go to Jerusalem, you're on hallowed ground. But when you go to Auschwitz, when you go to plantations, when you go to 9/11, when you go to Pearl Harbor, when you go to cemeteries, haunted places even, where tragedies happen, you're on hallowed ground.
Yeah.
And by going there and honoring people and their suffering, it does. I mean, there's something there is some type of energy, but I couldn't tell you what that energy is.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting story because it's one of those that there's no way to prove or disprove except for the sheer fact that you have a story to tell, and without that story, you may not be here. So it's one of those that it has a huge personal impact to you, and because of that, other people should maybe be able to take notice of it. But at the same time, it's one of those things that whenever we're dealing with the supernatural or paranormal, whatever you want to call it, I think that everyone's personal relationship to it is just that. It is personal and up to interpretation to maybe an extent. But that's one thing, is that we're always searching for the truth, and that can get a lot of people anxious. And sometimes, like you said, we just need to adopt that form of stoicism of saying, like, this is what is, this is what I can do, and everything else, just let it go.
Yeah. I mean, this is just like almost too much of a coincidence. So I was a huge Jane Goodall fan. Jane Goodall died, 10 days ago or so, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I wrote about her in the introduction of my book. I wrote about her being a big influence in my life, and I wrote about Viktor Frankl being a big influence in my life. Those two people were huge influences in their memoirs, were major influences on Jane Goodall. Significantly influenced the way I look at spirituality. So anyway, I was in Africa, and it's like, oh wow, I'm in Africa, same time Jane Goodall, same country that she studied chimpanzees in. But anyway, we stopped for a bathroom break. I think it was 2 days after she passed away. And we ended up being at the Uvalde Gulch. And it's like, I recognized the Uvalde Gulch, and and sure enough, there's a plaque there and these two giant skulls up there. But it was where Louis Leakey, it's where Jane Goodall's story really starts, her professional story, because she had always wanted to go to Africa, and her ticket to go to Africa was Louis Leakey, who was studying evolution, and he was digging up, other species of humans, and at that very gulch. And they call it the cradle of life, that gulch, because that's kind of where they believe maybe humanity really started.
Yeah.
And Jane Goodall he hired her to be his personal secretary. She was in her early 20s, and she was his personal secretary there. And I recognized it from her memoir. I'm like, oh my God, this is where Jane Goodall started her career. It's just like, it was just like too much. It's like, what's the chances that that's where we're going to stop to go to the bathroom, And it just, I was like choking up just driving away from there. It's like, I can't believe that just happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very strange how the world is both so vast and yet so small that we're able to have those kind of personal connections with someone that we've maybe never met face to face, and yet at the same time, we may be able to share that geographic location and be able to make that connection somehow.
Exactly. And that's what dark tourism's all about, is going to, places and having a personal connection with with not only history, but the people that live that history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go to the Tower of London, and that's where Henry VIII had Anne Boleyn beheaded, and Lady Jane Grey beheaded there, and many other people were beheaded at, and also you go there, and there's a prince, I can't remember his name, but two princes, and they were murdered by it was believed that they were murdered by their uncle because they were going to inherit the kingdom, and instead the uncle murdered him, and he inherited the kingdom. But anyway, you go there and you really reflect on their suffering, and when you do that, when you step in on this hallowed ground, you really learn again on that emotional level, and it comes back to just influence your life in a good, positive way, even though it was really dark things that happened.
Yeah. And I think that there's something to be said about everything being hallowed ground, even though it may not be what is conventionally known as hallowed ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Real quick, we are getting near the end of this episode. So do you think that we could have you on in the future again? Because I don't think that we've really got far enough into dark tourism, what all it can offer, and what some other personal anecdotes you may have with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to be on.
Sweet.
Been
But
fun.
do you think that we got time for our little game show segment today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. So, with that being said, Dr. Chad Scott, we're going to play a little game called Dark or Delightful. I'm going to name off a place, object, or experience, and I would like for you to decide whether it's dark, or something that's connected to pain, shadow, or reflection, or something that's delightful, something that renews life, brings joy, levity, or heals. Now, if you want, you can also provide a short explanation, or you can just kind of leave it as is, because I think
can I say both? Because I think there's a lot of things that are both.
Exactly, you definitely can. You can
Okay.
Maybe just don't say double D or double D. I guess that works. Either way.
Double D, yeah.
Okay, so first up on our list, we've got visiting an abandoned asylum. Is that dark or delightful?
Delight. I mean, it's dark and delightful, but yeah, I think that's definitely reflecting. I've done that. I went to the Nopaming Sanitarium, which isn't very far from here, and it's an abandoned. It's condemned now, but it is out in a lot of the ghost shows that have been through there, and there's so much suffering. It was an asylum, actually. It was a tuberculosis sanitarium, but many people have died there, and so it's very dark, but at the same time, the reflections you get, it can be a little, I don't know if delightful is the right word, but it can be meaningful.
Yeah, and I guess I could have named this a little bit better, defined it a little bit better, because some people think going to a cemetery is weird and creepy, and I love doing it on my free times.
Yeah.
But what about writing a letter to your past self?
That's delightful. Sure.
Okay.
Again, there might be some darkness in there, but yeah, I think the benefits of that, without a doubt, outweigh any darkness.
Okay. Now, what about eating alone at a candlelit restaurant?
Eating alone at a candlelit restaurant? Oh, man. Well, I do a lot of things alone. I like doing things with people, but I don't have a significant other right now, and it's like I'll go. That might be a little weird, but sure, I'll call it delightful.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother level of confidence right there.
Right? Yeah.
Or you could tell someone that you're just dating the ghost from next door, and just have people just give you weird looks, and they'd leave you alone.
Yeah, that reminds me of who are those two rappers that wear the clown makeup? The Insane Clown Posse. There's a song where a guy's dating a ghost. Yeah. It's a gross song, but
I haven't heard of them in years. I didn't know they're still a thing. What about watching a thunderstorm roll in?
Oh, that's delightful for sure.
Okay. No, I don't think we need an explanation on that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what about walking through a cemetery at sunrise?
Sunrise, gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever walked through a cemetery at sunrise. We'll call that delightful because, hey, if you're early to rise, why not?
Hopefully you're the only one there.
Sunset would be more fun. But...
Yeah, sunset is definitely more fun at the cemetery. But what about listening to your favorite sad song on repeat? Is that dark or delightful?
It probably depends on the mood you're in.
Fair.
But if it's, I think, well, I'll call that delightful because, it might feel hard, but sometimes feeling difficult things is healing. So any healing, I believe, is delightful.
Ooh, I love that. And what about the last 10 minutes of a therapy session?
If it's at the end of the day, I want to go home. It's very delightful. But usually, usually you wish you had a little bit more time to talk to people. So it's kind of, I would say that's dark because I don't like when my sessions end. I wish I could keep talking to people.
Yeah, that is for sure. And that's kind of how I feel about this, because it's not often that I find other people that are cemetery or dark place enthusiasts and have traveled the world to do so. And I'm a little jealous on that end.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to say this to your listeners because a lot of people will say, and I've heard this a lot, like, why would you want to go to those places and things? And I would say, give it a try, but you don't have to go to the darkest place. You don't have to go to a place where genocide occurred. You don't have to, just go to a local cemetery, go visit a local memorial, and just step outside your comfort zone just a little bit in terms of the darkness, because again, it took me a little bit of time to get into the darker aspects and the more significant places. And I think because I started with maybe a cemetery and just kind of slowly built it up, I guess, I was able to have probably deeper reflections at the more significant places because of, because I didn't treat them as a museum anymore. I treated them as like, man, these are like really sacred places.
Yeah. Ooh, thank you for sharing that. I think we could all really, really get behind, right? Just expanding our comfort zone. We don't have to necessarily break the comfort zone. We can expand it. But that takes some work.
Well, and I want to say this is, where, you're a mental health podcast. We have difficult things in our lives, traumas, and our default, the human default is to go into your comfort zone but what grows in a comfort zone? The only thing that grows in comfort zones is probably depression and anxiety and mold. Yeah. Over time, if you stay in your comfort zone, your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And, and then you just aren't living life anymore. So on the other side of that is reckoning. And if you reckon with your trauma, reckon with the stressors in your life, it's hard. It's a lot harder than staying in your comfort zone. Staying in your comfort zone is, I don't want to say it's easy either, but it's a lot easier than reckoning. But when you reckon with something, that's when you build, once you get through that other side and you get to the recovery, when you get to, for example, like, you said you've been sober for 4 years. It's not easy at first, and it still might not be easy, but it's a lot easier now than it was 4 years ago, but you have to go through a reckoning phase. And if you don't do that, you're much more likely to relapse. And so you get through that other side, but you become much more emotionally intelligent. You become a stronger human being. You're more resilient, and you're just, you're a better person because of the shit you went through in your life. And that's where people that have gone through darkness, when they've gone through I wouldn't be the person I am had I not went through my divorce, had I not had my liver transplant, had I not had severe anxiety, but I reckoned with it. I didn't stay in my comfort zone. I did something about it. And it's life-changing.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad that you did do something with it, because we got to have this awesome conversation, and we can have more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun.
Yeah. Real quick, because you played our dark or delightful. I mean, it was technically dark and delightful. Who am I?
Do I get a parting gift?
You get the honorary title of the cartographer of shadows, because you don't just visit the world's darkest corners, you map them, showing us where meaning still lives between the ruins. So,
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can I put that under my under my PhD, say cartographer of darkness? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, right. Go for it. And then if they ask where did you get that certificate from, they can always be directed to me, and I'll point them to this episode.
Awesome. But, yes.
One last question though, Dr. Scott. The name of this podcast is Retrieving Sanity, and we explore how all facets of living life impact mental health. Looking at the incredible motley adventures of your life, what does retrieving sanity personally mean to you today, and what's one practice or perspective you believe is crucial for anyone on that journey?
Reflection.
Ooh.
Reflection. If you just go through life and you don't reflect, you're not, kind of goes to that whole prediction thing. If you don't reflect on things, your prediction is going to just flap in the wind, and you're going to go with whatever political pundit or whatever your buddy tells you. You're just going to go down that bad rabbit hole. But when you reflect on things and you really look at things objectively, you're going to retrieve your sanity.
I love that. That's short, sweet, and to the point. And I think we could all use a little bit more reflection in our lives. What is the website that people can find you, your book, or get a hold of you if they need you?
Yeah, drchadscott.com is my website, and you can find links to my book and learn about dark tourism and learn a little bit more about me. And if you want, I'm trying to market myself a little bit to, museums and historical sites and things where, for example, instead of just talking about what happened there, asking reflective questions to people. So they, kind of going back to the reflection thing, because when you go there and you can learn things on an emotional level and be able to attach it to your life somehow, you can carry what you learn there and farther. So you can find my book pretty much anywhere you buy books. It's hit or miss whether it's in a bookstore near you or not, but you certainly can get it online at all the usual places. And it's also an audiobook. I didn't read it; somebody else read it for me. I'm too clunky of a reader, so I had we had a professional actor read it, and and it's on Kindle too. So
nice.
Yep.
Very cool. And thank you for sharing that information with us, because I know that I'm going to have to check out the book and just read all about it, because it's again not
sounds like it's right up your alley. It's
right up my alley.
Mental health / dark tourism, and there you go.
Thank you for everything that you've done, not only for the world but for yourself, because you help provide more for the world. And it's just awesome that we get to have these kind of conversations to hopefully help other people.
I'll take it, but I'm going to throw that right back at you. Thank you. We need more voices like yours to shed light on this stuff.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we are at the end of this episode, but everyone else out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. This has been Keegan, and this has been Dr. Chad Scott. Dr. Chad
you
Scott.
just broke something.
And we will see y'all somewhere along some shadowy places, and hopefully you've done some reflecting until then. But remember, if you've got a mental health crisis, give the number 988 a call, and be sure to love yourself, love others if you can, but you've got to love yourself first. And we will see you next week. And Dr. Chad Scott, thank you again for being on the show. And
thanks for having me, Keegan. It's been great.
Of course. And everyone out there, once again, have a good night.
Bye.